And we're live.
This is Plant Daddies podcast, serving you intersectional horticulture. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Steven.
Hello, welcome back to Plant Daddies podcast. Today we welcome to the show a good friend of mine, John. Welcome to the show, John.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course, we're so happy that you're here with us. So you are proudly a new plant daddy, and I kind of have to say that I claim a little bit of responsibility for helping push you into that realm.
This is the third person you've claimed at least.
I mean, you already had that inclination, clearly,
Yes.
but I think I just encouraged it.
Yeah, you definitely helped. I mean, you went shopping with me that one day where I went overboard and bought like 8 plants at once.
Was that a glasswing?
Yeah.
They've got
At the
some good
greenhouse.
I got a gardenia that day.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came into this hobby.
Yeah, I think that, so my familiarity with plants has all been outdoor plants for most of my life. I come from like a long lineage of gardeners. My grandma had a massive vegetable garden that I worked in all the time with her growing up, and my mom worked at a greenhouse my whole childhood and
Wow.
still
Cool.
currently. She's made like a really great career of it. My first job actually, which is funny, was planting pansies at a greenhouse.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I've had a lot of experience with like greenhouse side of it, but not a lot of indoor houseplants. My mom kills
Yeah.
every houseplant she gets, but she can keep anything outdoors alive.
Interesting.
Well, that's
Yeah.
impressive.
But recently I've like been going through a lot of health issues, and it's been just super nice taking care of something that's not my own body.
It is so therapeutic,
Oh,
isn't
Yeah,
it?
so it's super therapeutic, and I have definitely gone over the deep end with how many I got in a short amount of time. But it's also, though, I needed my space to look a certain way.
Yeah. And I think that's a really common narrative where you have two sides of it. One is that you just got a ton of plants all at once and you just like dove in. So many people do that.
Yeah.
But then the other side, there's a huge community of people on Instagram who like openly talk about how they use plants as their own therapy for whether it's like physical health or mental health. Like there's just something so calming and therapeutic about that process.
Totally. It's really great to just kind of take, I mean, it usually is more than an hour a week, but there's like an hour a week where I go and I just check up on all of them. And I see what their water needs are for that week, or, how, if there's new growth, all of that, and kind of check in with them.
Yeah. It's always a reward when you see new leaves.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so you're describing the full-blown addiction, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about you as a human being, like what you do here in Seattle?
Yeah, I'm originally from Virginia. I moved here in 2010. And I've been working in education since. I work at one of the local universities here as a academic advisor. So I help like with academic counseling and helping students figure out like how to graduate on time, things like that. But outside of that, I feel like I'm obsessed with the Northwest. I love being outdoors, love to be outside as much as possible. Seattle has, for a foodie, such a foodie. There's like so much places to eat here, and
Yeah, really diverse food too.
yeah, I feel like that sounds like such a boring answer, but I'm like such a creature of habit at this point that outside of traveling, like Seattle, it's just my home at this point. I've been here so long.
Yep.
Awesome.
We've talked with other guests that we've had who have mostly all been like white cis gay men about the intersection of like your gayness with the plant hobby. Do you have any thoughts on like the identity that this hobby attracts?
Yeah, and I can kind of frame that as well. I had a friend who would, was thinking like, is this hobby a gay hobby? Is this something where, if you see a bunch of houseplants in someone's home, are you kind of like, oh, this is, maybe this is a gay person, or is that fair? Or, if you want to weigh in on that.
I mean, my first job was planting pansies, so it feels like it's
Yeah,
like was I created and like
if there were ever someone,
wow.
That's when you knew you were gay.
if someone were ever qualified.
This task
yeah.
has been given to me, therefore.
Yeah. No, I don't know if I think that there's a lot of gay men that are just naturally nurturing, and that's something that I think we we seek out a lot of time. I mean, so I think that it adds up, and it makes a lot of sense to me why there's a lot of queer men specifically who are into like, who are calling themselves Plant Daddies. Like, if you go on Grindr or Scruff or anything like that, there's like so many people who describe themselves in their profiles as Plant Daddy.
I think that's where we should be looking for new listeners.
Oh gosh. Well, Matthew, you get right on that.
Yeah, my grinding is gonna get intense.
Yeah, just put your Instagram Plant Daddy thing up as your Instagram.
Yeah, I barely use Grindr or Scruff at all, but I'm linking all to my personal accounts. I feel like I should just like really go hard into like promotion.
Just to give you another area to find it.
Yeah,
well,
he needs that.
and that's kind of the point when I've heard other gay podcasts like regularly just get dick pics from their listeners. So I think that then Stephen and I would open our doors to that, our email doors. Okay.
I think I'm just gonna
let that hang.
Yeah. So Steven's not saying not to do it.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
We're not telling you to either. Okay, so before we dive into our topic, I just want to remind everybody that we can be found on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest as Plant Daddy Podcast, and also online at plantdaddypodcast.com. We love receiving emails, which doesn't happen often, but if you choose to use that, it's plantdaddypodcast@gmail.com. And if you go onto iTunes or wherever you listen to your episodes, we would love it if you could rate and subscribe, share some, cool, interesting connection that you have had or things that you have learned. We love hearing ideas that people want to hear us cover. So be in touch and help others find us by giving us those ratings.
Also, did you want to mention the plant swap we just went to?
Oh, yeah. So we spent our Sunday morning at a rainy plant swap down in White Center. It was actually really great. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about it, Stephen?
So yeah, this was a plant swap set up by our friend Miles at the Seattle Plant Store. It was held a couple doors down at New Flowers. It's called Fresh Flowers.
Yeah, Fresh Flowers Bakery.
Yeah, so it was a great outdoor space despite the rain. They had some vendors there selling art and a bunch of really interested hobbyists like us there with cuttings, some really interesting Hoyas, tons of succulents.
There were a lot of aroids.
Yeah, lots of aroids.
Yeah.
But it was great. The next one is when? In February?
Yeah, so these plant swaps are something that are becoming popular and trendy. They're popular because they can happen within any plant community, and it's a great way for growers of interesting, unique plants to just share cuttings and like little propagates. Little baby plants that get propagated.
Definitely. I think it's just called a cutting.
Yeah, cuttings.
Okay.
I happened to leave people with all the plants that I brought, but then I got more plants to bring home, so Brian's going to be thrilled about that one.
And listen, I've done this 900 times. I didn't do it this time. This
Yeah.
time, I think I got rid of half of what I brought,
Yeah.
which is pretty good for me.
But the next one's going to be in February. It's not going to be hosted by New Flowers Bakery. They have a beautiful outdoor garden space that in February won't be so beautiful. So instead it's going to be at a community center that Miles is setting up. And Plant Daddy Podcast is going to be there. We're going to have our own table and...
Okay, yeah, we hope, right? Like, we'll see how it goes.
I'm going to make this happen.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
Okay,
Plant
you're throwing down the gauntlet. We're having a booth.
Yeah,
Okay,
we're also
okay.
going to have like dancers and cages.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, so, John, you came across a plant a while ago, and you reached out to Matthew for some tips. What were you growing, and what did you want to learn?
Yeah, I got a well, first of all, I really love ferns, but I haven't had a lot of success with them. But I heard that Staghorn Ferns were a really good introductory fern to kind of start with.
They're my favorite fern for indoors. They're not nearly as traumatizing as maidenhair ferns or many others.
Oh, I know. My maidenhair fern, I had it and it immediately shriveled up. It just wasn't.
I was going to say,
wasn't
did it
for
look
me.
nice the next morning after you got it? Then
No, it
it was
did not.
successful.
So, and there was something specific you wanted to learn, though.
Yeah, I wanted to learn how
I'm
to...
really teeing this up.
Sorry.
That's okay. No, I'm like, that didn't sound. I'm let's just leading it to that.
It's okay.
I really wanted to learn how to mount them. I know that you have some that are mounted, don't you?
That's actually how I grow most of my Staghorn ferns, is mounted. And the ones that I don't grow mounted, I have used other techniques that mimic that, like kokedama. But we'll talk about that more in a bit.
Yeah, so I have mine in a pot, and I mean it's doing well. It has new growth coming from the pot, but I just heard that they grow more successfully when mounted. Because that's what is it called when stuff likes to grow on
Epiphytic.
Epiphytic.
Yeah. It grows on trees. It's an epiphyte. If it grows on rocks, it's a lithophyte. But the Staghorn Ferns are mostly going to be growing on trees.
And really, you brought your plant today. It looks amazing. So you clearly know what you're doing with this. So yeah, we can just talk you through then how you should mount it. But I mean, it's not like it needs a ton of help. I just want to make that clear for listeners. It looks great.
Yeah,
That's really sweet. I feel like that more is to like talk about how great of an introductory fern this is, to be honest.
Okay.
I mean, I take care of it. I mean, I check on all my plants weekly, but I think that they're really, really friendly. They're really friendly for like new plant owners.
So you don't have any other mounted plants in your collection then?
I do not, no.
Okay.
So tell us how you kind of came to see that mounting was a technique for these, and like what your introduction to that was.
Well, the first staghorn fern that I remember really looking at and just being amazed by was, have you all been to the conservatory in Volunteer Park here in Seattle?
Yes.
They have the most breathtaking staghorn ferns I've ever seen.
Yes, actually, that's the first place I saw them. I
Yeah.
was like, wow, what is this massive thing? I
What
could
is
never
it?
have this. This is a jungle something.
They look
I know.
so alien.
Yeah.
I know, and being a southerner who grew up around taxidermy, who's also a vegetarian, it's like a little bit like the closest thing I can have to vegetarian taxidermy. So-
Yeah,
Wow.
so actually,
Actually, I
I'm
love
thrilled that
that.
you brought that up, because before you got here, I was telling Steven that a lot of people online are like, it's like the vegan, like, mounted stag, but it's a plant.
Yeah.
Actually, I never had thought of that.
Yeah, that's totally how they're grown. It's delightful.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is my 2019 vegetarian taxidermy.
I love it.
Wow.
You're so cruelty free.
So, Matthew, I can see you're itching to share some background on this plant. So go ahead. I will restrain you.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to make this pretty brief. But first, John, I want to ask if you have any questions about where this plant comes from or how it grows in the wild that were interesting to you that you don't know yet.
Well, I know it grows on trees, but I don't know what type of tree or like where it's from, what region, anything like that.
Okay. I don't think they care too much about what kind of tree that they're on. But basically, the Platycerium ferns, they're mostly found in the Old World tropical regions. They're really popular in those areas because they're just a wild growing plant that you can find in huge specimens, and they do really well in potted culture. So they've also spread throughout a lot of other parts of the world. There's one species in South America. They're really pretty cool. They are basically going to be like one or two species in cultivation that you're going to encounter. So that's going to be Platycerium bifurcatum and Platycerium superbum. We're just going to focus on these because they're the easy ones that you're going to encounter most of the time. There are other species. They might have slightly different needs, but largely these ferns are quite similar. And the ones that need specific differences in their care are going to be difficult to find, and they're going to be priced at a level that indicates that they're specialty collector's plants. So you're going to have a hard time accidentally getting a tricky species. They're all the common ones. They're all going to be dependable.
So I think another interesting thing here is that these aren't really fern shaped. We were just talking about that huge one at the local garden. I mean, that one, it's kind of like a bucket or shield kind of thing, antlers, like you're saying.
Yeah, mine has two different. They're like plate. I don't remember what are those specifically called.
Well, so it's worth talking about the morphology because that's going to be important when we take into consideration how to grow these plants and care for them. They have a short rhizome that all the fronds are going to come out of. And there's two kinds of fronds. So the ones that you're talking about are basically sterile, and the ones that jut out like antlers are fertile fronds.
Well, I have a new growth of one of the ones that eventually
One of the basal shield.
So we should,
Yeah.
if you want to take a photo of what a new growth of that looks like versus what.
Yeah,
it
we're
shows
gonna
into.
post some photos on Instagram to kind of document this experience.
All right, and so just so we're clear, basal growth means growth toward the bottom of the plant, right? So generally speaking, It's kind of the shield-looking part, right, Matthew? And
Yeah,
John, or
and
like
the basal fronds,
round part.
yeah, they're kind of like variably kidney shaped, and they grow pretty much flush against the growing surface. And this protects and shields the roots, and it also holds in moisture during drier periods. With age, you're going to find that the basal fronds dry out and become brown. That's totally fine and natural. They'll only have a few of them at once that are green, and if there are none that are green, that doesn't mean that the plant is unhealthy. It just that's what they do. Now, over time, as the plant becomes really mature, these basal fronds kind of stop being as flush to the growing surface, and the top portion might form like a lobed upper crown that sort of creates like a basket shape that'll help to catch like detritus and leaves and water for rain, and this helps prevent like desiccation of the plant, and it also helps to create a mulch that will hold moisture and it will provide nutrients for the plants. As the old fronds that have turned brown get covered by subsequent layers, they'll also provide a nice moist environment for the roots as they mulch down.
So that bottom basal shield part, does that actually catch water? It just kind of slows water? Have you
Well,
noticed that?
it'll like hold water.
Traps humidity.
Yeah, it's like if you have a dry environment, but you put a wet paper towel over something, and then you put like a piece of aluminum foil over
yeah,
that.
interesting.
Like it'll help to keep the moisture in, so that when it's dry, these ferns do come from areas that dry regularly. It just makes the most of that available water.
Okay, and those aren't the fertile ones. The fertile ones are like the antler-shaped, kind of like the antlers in your vegan antlers.
They're like the ones that jut out of the rhizome, and you'll see them conspicuously. There's often more of them than the base fronds. On a really mature plant, like the whole thing is crazy, so you'll see the antler fronds like hanging down, and then you'll see the shield ferns like jutting out behind. But for most plants that you have, the majority of its foliage will be the fertile fronds. Now, because they're ferns, they aren't blooming plants. They'll instead reproduce via spores. So when a plant is mature, these fronds are the ones that will develop that. They're just kind of going to cover the backside of the leaves. They'll brush off, wash off, blow off.
And this is like fern style, like little spots, right?
Yeah. I'm not actually really sure if it's the same across all of them. Some species will produce them just in certain areas. Some of them, it might be like the whole backside is covered. There's a variety of ways that they do this. Young plants don't tend to have them, so if you're going to be looking at the one that you bought and it's in a nursery pot, it's probably not going to have any of the spores, and that's totally fine.
Right.
It's difficult to reproduce fern from spores in a home environment, because it takes years, and like it's kind of a more advanced topic that I'm not going to dive into.
Do you by chance know why they have like little, like almost like little hairs on the top of the...
Yeah, so those are called trichomes, and they are a feature that a lot of plants have. They're like a little hair, and those serve like multiple purposes. You'll also like notice that there's a different density of them. Like a young leaf will look white and fuzzy as the leaf expands, and those trichomes that were all there to begin with then like spread out. Some cultivars, I believe there's one called Netherlands or like Amsterdam Moon or something, that has a lot more trichomes than the typical species. And I'll post photos of this one because it's one that I grow, but they have a much silverier appearance than the typical green. You can wipe those off of the leaf. They'll come off freely. It's not going to harm the plant, but to preserve the appearance of it, it's better to not like rub up against the leaves regularly. They'll help to absorb moisture and humidity out of the air. The whole plant will absorb moisture, not just the roots. So this is a good candidate for misting, and you can tell that you've misted the plant thoroughly because the trichomes won't look white and glistening. They'll just kind of blend in green with the plant when it's well moistened. Now, the fronds that we're talking about on young plants, they don't have a lot of that branching. They're pretty simple in shape, and so as the plant grows older, that's when you'll start to see them develop the more intense lobes, the splits, the stuff that makes them look more like an antler.
So when I see these in shops, it's usually in pots. And then on social media, they're typically mounted. Do you think there's something keeping people away from mounting? Or, I mean, maybe, yeah, you could answer this. Is it, you're just not sure how to mount it, maybe?
Yeah, totally. I feel like I'm not where my love of plants like thrives, but my fear of tools and any type of like
Oh,
any
Yeah.
type of aspect
yeah.
around mounting something. It just feels like I don't have as much.
It sounds really ambitious.
Yeah, it seems really ambitious.
But it's actually really simple. Stephen kind of touched on like the difference between growing pots and plants versus plants mounted. Obviously, there's much more airflow around them, and the roots aren't contained in a plastic container that'll retain moisture. So you have to water much more regularly. But you're also mimicking their natural growing conditions that way, because in the wild they'll get dumped on in a monsoon, then they might dry for a while, and they want that drying to maintain health. If they stay too wet for too long, like they're inclined to do in pots that
Yeah.
keep moist longer, the rhizome might rot, the fronds might rot off. You can resuscitate a plant that's grown that way, but if you're growing it mounted, there's almost nothing that you can do to overwater it.
So, are you mounting it for the look mostly? Or just to try it kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I have a perfect spot where I want to put it, but it's
Say no more.
yeah, but also I think that it's just going to be like a happier plant. Like I think I've managed to do a good job of not overwatering it for being in a pot, but I just
Okay.
think that it's going to be a lot more natural for like me understanding what it needs
Yeah.
and how it dries out a little bit quicker
Yeah.
to be able to respond to it.
And some of that morphology that we were talking about that make these ferns look so unique and fascinating, you're just not going to see that in a pot because it's going to kind of keep the plant in a young form, and it's going to be struggling a little bit to grow those base fronds the way that you want them to appear. You're going to lose some of the visual interest if you don't let the plant kind of grow in its wild form, which is something that I think a lot of mounted plants are grown in order to retain. Yeah. So, do you have any other questions before I just kind of walk us through the process of mounting?
I don't think so.
Okay, so it sounds really ambitious, but it's really pretty straightforward. And this is a method that works with like literally anything that wants to be mounted. You'll just do some variants of this. But the first thing to do is to find a fern. You can buy these almost anywhere. I think I've seen them in virtually every garden center that I've ever gone into.
Really?
Yeah.
Staghorn Ferns?
They're
I-
really popular right now.
Yeah, like you can often buy little 4-inch babies that are young enough that they might not have a lot of base fronds. You can buy large hanging pots of them at Home Depot.
Sometimes they're already even mounted.
Yeah.
I've seen.
Oh,
And,
wow.
like-
I'm just not really a fern person, honestly. So I feel like I've seen these, but at Sun Shop and specialty places. Maybe I haven't looked around. Okay.
They're like pretty easy to find. So I don't imagine that you'll have any trouble locating one.
Yeah, and the price point's not outrageous for them.
They're pretty easy to propagate, and they'll grow little babies around the side that you can divide and pull out and grow independently.
Awesome.
So I think that it's easy to find them at a low price, but the things to look for, you obviously want a healthy looking plant that you can tell that the leaves are coming out of a healthy rhizome, that there's no browning or discoloration towards the base. It's nice that they have some shield fronds, but you'll have success regardless of kind of what your starting fern is. Now, you then have to figure out what you're going to mount it on. And the thing about these ferns that we mentioned, they grow huge. So you want to find a mount that you can easily attach to a future mount when it outgrows that one. So for instance, you'll start with some kind of wood surface. I like cedar or cork. Cork more for orchids, but you can use them for staghorns. My favorite though right now is just a plain cedar fencing board because cedar is pretty resistant to rot. It will break down over time, but you'll start your plant on a cedar board. Go to our Instagram to look at some pictures of how we're going to do this. And as the plant gets large enough to cover that, then you just get a larger board, nail the old one onto the new one, and just let the fern continue to grow. The way to prepare the mount, you can either drill holes, tap in nails, drive in some screws, like to give yourself something to loop your string around. Because once you position the plant in the middle of the board, you need some way to attach it. So you could either just wrap material around the whole board, or it uses pre-drilled holes or nail studs to kind of lace the string around them. Now, you take the plant out of the pot, you're going to find that it has a lot of black, thick, thickly grown but really fine kind of fibrous roots. So you want to kind of clean up the root ball a bit. You don't want to remove a ton of the roots, but you don't want there to be a lot of excess soil. It's not about taking the entire amount of soil that the plant was potted in and like getting it on the board. Instead, you're going to clean it up, get yourself like a sizable root ball, like kind of for a typical 4-inch pot, like a root ball that you can hold in one hand easily. And that should provide enough moisture retention and enough space for the roots to grow. Okay, so then you'll determine the placement of the plant. They'll grow to orient themselves with an up and a bottom. So sometimes the plant that you have in a pot will seem to have a way that it wants to be positioned. And so you just kind of figure that out, place it on your board, and make sure that you've got the space that you need for it. Then you add sphagnum or sheet moss to cover the root ball, and then you just secure it to the mount, whether you're using your pre-drilled holes or the screws or nails that you left in. Once it's really secure, you just basically like water it thoroughly and let it dry so that it's not running water. And then you hang it up in a sunny, like indirectly sunny spot, and you're good to go. So, do you have any questions about this, or are you ready to take a pause from recording and get to mounting?
Let's mount it.
All right. We'll be back in a moment, guys.
And we're back.
All right. So, John, how hard was that?
Well, honestly, Matthew, you made that look like the easiest thing in the world.
Matthew was ruthless and efficient. Okay, I was
I've
kind
done
of
this a few times.
because for me, I was like, I'll like pick a mount. I'll preciously be like, should I go over here?
So-
Like Matthew was there sawing, drilling. It was all done in like 95 seconds. Maybe.
Let me describe what I did. So, John's fern was in like a 6-inch pot when you bought it, probably, right?
Probably.
Yeah, like it
5
was,
or 6 inch
I
probably.
never
So-
know what the sizes are actually.
Yeah, I don't either.
There's like 4 inches, not actually 4 inches, but
Yeah, it's
okay.
like
Anyway,
3/4.
6, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
But so it was like a large plant with multiple little offshoots that it had grown. So it was a big enough fern that it's going to give immediate dramatic impact. Because a standard cedar fencing board is like only so many inches across. We joined 2 of them side by side to make a larger plaque. Just by cutting 3 pieces, 2 of them side by side, and the third one just in the back that we screwed into to attach them into like a double wide mounting plaque out of cedar. So, John, walk us through what that process was and how you mounted your staghorn.
Yeah, so after we connected the 3 boards to be able to have, the 2 boards on the front and then the
Like the bracing one.
bracing one on the back, Matthew put in 10 screws around in a circle. I think you ended up doing it where you Sharpied around the plant to see just kind of how big it was as a reference point.
Yeah,
Like,
the first thing that you did was you unpotted it, you cleaned off the root ball. Talk us through that process.
Oh, yeah. So I tipped the pot over just a little bit and tapped it so that the actual plant would come out. But you could tell that, this isn't the pot that I bought this plant in, so the roots were pretty
Yeah, it's like not root bound. They were kind of compact.
yeah, they were pretty compact.
You could still see like where the old pot had been, but it had grown some new roots into the medium. What we did actually by removing the roots that you did to create a smaller flat root ball that would mount nicely. That's basically like a root prune, which is kind of encouraging the plant to grow fresh roots because it's had some damage. So now with all of those ends that were broken off gently, it's going to grow tons of new ones. They're black, they're kind of furry, they're fibrous, and they're going to really like adhere themselves into nooks and crannies and secure themselves to that board as it establishes. So you really got off to a good start by doing that.
Yeah, it was like nice and flat on the bottom where it would sit well on the board.
Yeah. So after you kind of got the root ball clean, we found the position that you wanted to put it on the board. It's a beautiful plant, so I don't think that we really had a bad choice there.
No.
Sometimes you'll find a really lopsided plant that clearly will only look right in a certain way. And if that's the case, you'll have like one way that it'll look great, I'm sure. But this one was pretty fine. So after you did that, and we drew the line to kind of define what the root ball area was going to take up. I screwed in 10 screws around the outside, leaving like half an inch or so that we could use to lash twine and fishing line to. Tell us what we did next.
Well, we covered the root ball with moss, and so putting the moss there, I guess, is a good way to keep the moisture in.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the purpose of that?
Yeah, and I think it kind of cradled it, right? Like acted like a basket a little bit in my mind.
Yeah, the potting substrate was peat-based with lots of perlite for drainage and moisture retention. But if you just attached a plant to a board with dirt, every time you watered, that dirt would just come off. Yeah, so the moss is largely there to hold the soil in place and hold that water in. So
Gotcha.
You're kind of creating an artificial, surface as though it had grown that way and established that way.
So will that remain there, you think? Will those shields come, or when does that happen, the shield part?
As the plant becomes established, it's going to start growing shield fronds, and it's going to start covering that area.
Covering it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, as little roots kind of develop and grow along, they might produce little baby plantlets along them. So if you have, like, one way that I've seen them growing that I would love to do if I lived in Florida is you just take like a hanging basket that you would use for like fuchsias or something, and you use like a metal one that's not going to rust away quickly, and you just like tuck a few little baby plants around the whole outside of appropriate substrate holding basket, and then over time they'll just grow to cover the whole thing in a ball, because new roots produce baby plants, the shield fronds cover everything that you're seeing, so you have these really beautiful like hanging spears of ferns.
That's cool.
Yeah, they're really gorgeous.
It's the best plant.
Right? And just like
Really?
you said.
Yeah, I don't agree.
Well,
Okay,
that's fine,
go ahead.
Steve.
Yeah. People say that, and I'm like, no, they don't.
Yeah. So
To each their own.
Yeah,
exactly.
that's totally. I mean, so every time I hear that, I'm like, you too? What?
That just means that when Steve and I go to plant sales, he's looking for the ugly mangled succulents.
No, we are almost never competing, and maybe
Yeah.
that's why this works.
Yeah, because
we've never had a fight. Really.
there's only
I
like
mean,
3 or 4 plants.
Euphorbia obesa, I was kind of like, all right, listen, I want to fight a second one for you, but I'm like, I'm like, you wanted to get coffee, and then I got it, because
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not gonna wait for coffee. I'm gonna get it.
Yeah, I don't think we mentioned
Anyway.
this on the podcast. So there was a succulent society meeting, the Cascade Succulents and Cactus Society, and Steven and I drove up there to Sky Nursery, and we were both like talking about plants that we were hoping to find, and we both wanted Euphorbia obesum, which basically obesa, thank you. It just looks like a really beautiful softball. Like it's
To me, it's kind of like it's an Art Deco like saguaro cactus. A little bit looking. It's geometric and
Succulents
anyway.
just don't do well in my apartment.
You just don't have the
because
light
I
for
have
them.
an east-facing apartment, and so for me, I'm
it's
like
fairly
all about
shaded
the,
by trees too.
Yeah, give me all the philodendron.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry.
Anyway, so
Yeah.
back to how do you mount this thing?
So
Right.
after we put the moss, yeah,
After we
Anyways,
wrapped
we
it
said-
around.
Yeah, so it's like the shield fronds are gonna grow.
Yeah.
Right.
but how did you
And-
attach this pile that we put on the board?
I ended up twisting twine around the screws and around the base of it.
Kind of lashing back and forth.
Lashing back and forth. Trying to find delicate places I could put it over the fern, actually, so that it would stay attached and not hurt the growth of it or any
Yeah.
of the leaves. And then after the twine had it secured, we double secured it with fishing line.
And that was also the time when, if there were any areas that we needed more moss, you were able to add those.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we use the fishing line because the twine might degrade over time, right? That's
Yeah.
what I thought. Like it's going to be so wet. This is a fern. There was moss.
This is a biodegradable natural material that I use a lot for mounting because it does break down and fall off eventually, which is fine for most epiphytes because the epiphytes, their roots secure them. So once the plant is established, you should be fine.
Totally.
Now, in this particular case, because the moss is being held in place with the twine, you don't know how quickly the shield fronds are going to develop, how quickly the roots are going to establish it. You might reach a point where the string has biodegraded and the plant wasn't secure enough, and then chunks of it would start coming off. So we just added the fishing line on top just to make sure that that wasn't a problem. you don't have any worries about leaving that long term. If you never
Yeah.
remove the fishing line, it'll be totally fine. The plant will just grow around it. If you were growing like orchids or something, I would be careful because that can sometimes constrict or like cut into the roots. So you'll often remove the fishing line, but this is a case where that's not important.
One thing that I intentionally did, which I don't know if it was a good thing, I intentionally like didn't water this leading up to this so that we would have the right type of soil. Was that the right thing to do?
That was ideal.
Okay,
Yeah, because we were able to, like, the soil was dry, but it wasn't like desiccated, bone dry. But it made removing the excess roots, the excess soil easier. And it also means that then when you mount it and water it the first time, the roots are like, oh yeah, water. So then they'll actually like kind of initiate that growth quickly. That's not a critical step. If you have a plant that's been well watered, it's going to be fine. It'll just be a little bit messier when you're doing it, but this isn't a clean process that you should do indoors, unless you just want to sweep up a lot of debris. Yeah, so on a scale of 1 to 10, how easy was this?
1 being not easy, 10 being
Great
easy.
question.
I would have done like 10 is I've never gone through more trouble in my
Yeah.
life,
Oh,
and
got it.
and
Okay.
1 is like I don't even have to think.
I would say that it was once I figured out what was happening, because it happened so fast, it was a 3.
Yeah, like it's a really
Yeah,
quick
it's-
process.
Yeah, it was really quick. Way faster than I thought it would
Yeah,
be.
and I think really it's just attaching a plant to a board. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like, this is how I would try to do this anyway.
If you're familiar with kodama balls, which are you familiar with kodama balls?
I am not.
Oh, I've mentioned them to you like 3 times today, as though that's something that the world knows. So that is where instead of using a pot and soil, it's a Japanese technique where you'll grow a plant in a ball of substrate with moss wrapped around it in a little ball. And so you'll often see them hanging, like people will hang them in windows, and so you'll have like this round mossy ball with some beautiful plant coming out. And this is a great way to do a lot of epiphytes because they like that airflow around them. They like the dampness of their roots that dries quickly. So you get a lot of both worlds. This is like the alternative. So instead of growing it in a bowl that you would either hang or place in a dish, you're just hanging it on your wall like a piece of living
And
art.
just before people correct us, it's kokedama.
Oh, thank you.
Kokedama.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right, because the kodama are those precious little forest spirits from
Yeah.
Spirited Away.
Yeah.
Aw.
The little like rattling noise that they make with their heads is the text tone of when Brian messages me.
That's really
Wow.
sweet.
It's cute. We have them hidden around our apartment. Okay, so let's talk about the long-term care. So we talked a little bit about this while we were working through the process, but for our listeners, this is a plant that likes to have a wet and dry cycle. And so the way that you achieve that at home is you just put it in your sink or your bathtub and you flood it. Like,
Yeah, so it might be good too. How are you taking care of this now, right? If we hear his care regime, we could be like, oh, this is what we need to tweak.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Well,
what are you doing?
What have you been doing up to now?
I have it. My ferns have I do have 2 other ferns that I've managed to keep alive, even though I've said they're not the easiest for me.
Ferns
I have
are a struggle.
Yeah, I have a bird's nest fern and then a blue.
Oh, that really beautiful, like, powdery one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't think of what it's called right
Its
now.
name starts with a P, but I can't remember.
Yeah. Sorry, listeners, that wasn't helpful.
Damn it, John.
But it has its own personal cute little lemon humidifier.
Oh, cute.
Yeah. But I now have space where this one was, so I have to figure out what to put there. Anyways, but the
Sounds like a new plant.
yeah, but
So sorry, what's a lemon humidifier?
oh, it's just a humidifier that looks like a lemon.
Oh, okay.
It's really adorable.
It sounds precious.
I can send you all a little pho of it.
So
if
it's
you
like a
wanna see
little
it.
mechanical one you're saying
Yeah.
that shoots.
Post
okay.
on Instagram and tag us.
Yeah, I will.
Oh my
And then I like with any other plant, I always check the soil and see where it's at. I know that they like to be moist. So once they get to the point where they're like still wet but starting to like get a little bit
So you're like poking the soil with your finger,
Yeah.
or okay,
yeah,
all right.
So, I mean, you're not going to be able to poke the soil now.
Totally.
But you can feel the outside of it.
yeah.
So, if you were using long fiber sphagnum moss, that has a texture that is like clearly different when it's dry. It's like brittle and a little hard, whereas when it's soft, it's, moist and pliable. So you can like feel that to see. You should be able to do a little bit of that with the sheet moss that we use today, which is easier to find. It's more ecologically sustainable. It's probably a better moss to use in this case. But you can look to kind of the state of the fertile fronds to determine your watering regime. If they start wilting, that means that you need to water it. It's going to be fine if it wilts pretty hard. The leaves will actually desiccate a little bit and look kind of shrunken. You can bring it back by a good watering. So you don't have to worry too much about that. This is a fern that is designed to dry, unlike most of them. But you're going to get the best growth, especially during the warmer summer months when there's a lot of light, there's a lot of warmth. If you just are able to boost the humidity and keep it from getting to a bone dry state. In the winter, when it's not actively growing and there's a little bit less light, I would actually let it just reach bone dry, then water it.
Okay. So would that be like a week and a half every 2 weeks?
Yeah, it is definitely going to depend on the humidity level of your apartment.
It's going to be dry, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Usually. I have a humidifier, but...
But you're saying 1.5 to 2 weeks, that's less watering than you're doing now, right?
In the
I would
winter...
say-
Yeah,
just seasonally. Okay.
Yeah, like water it more actively when it's actively growing in warm summer months.
Yeah.
Like you've been doing. But then when it's in more dormant, like kind of holding on winter growth, which you haven't had it during winter yet. You've had this plant for like 5 months.
Yeah, I've had it for 5 months. And a lot of new growth has grown from it since I've gotten it, but the thing that I'm anticipating it being mounted, that I'm gonna have to water it more than I did.
That's
the
true.
moisture would stayed in the pot.
Yeah, the wood will absorb moisture out of it. The air around the entire surface is going to dry it. So the goal is just to keep it, when it's actively growing, happily moist. Okay. When it's not actively growing, let it dry a little. But that's actually true of most of your houseplants.
Totally.
Most plants you're going to water fewer times, less frequently in the winter.
Yeah.
So I would say, seasons aside, all things being equal, you're going to probably water this a bit more, right? There's more exposed area. It could be drying from more places.
Yeah.
Right, would you say? And I'm just wondering, if you have that shield down there, the one that collects water and detritus and everything, is that holding more water in this case for this plant?
I wouldn't worry about that yet. The plant is still young enough that over time, yes, definitely. But right now, before you have shield fronds that are covering the base of the plant, it's going to be pretty minimal. As they start to cover the whole thing, yeah, Steven's right. It's going to retain its own moisture better. So...
How long would you expect that to take?
It depends on your growing conditions. If the light is really solid, in a northern area like here, you could probably get away with nearly direct full sun. The leaves will burn if it's too hot, but they like very bright light. So if the conditions are ideal, within a year, if your humidity is high, if your sun is bright, if you're watering consistently and fertilizing occasionally, it could be covered with shield basal fronds by this time next year. On the other hand, like a lot of mine, if I water them less reliably and if I put them in areas that are lower light where they'll tolerate it but not thrive, some of the ones that I've had mounted for a couple of years have fronds that it has grown, but it's not totally covering the base yet. So
that sounds great, John.
Yeah.
Okay, within a year, and this one is so large, this is going to be like the equivalent of a vegan elk or vegan moose. It's going to be very large.
I feel like that's very kind, but I'll even settle for a antelope. I don't know.
An antelope. They have like little prongs.
Listen, we're gonna do a lot better than that. Okay, it's still it's already a deer.
Yeah,
okay?
you're right.
So he's underselling it. It looks great.
Now, one of the other things that's important to do is to give them regular misting, because like we mentioned, they absorb water through the whole plant, not just the roots. So between waterings, if you just give it like a really healthy soaking mist occasionally, it's gonna love that. They love high humidity, so the higher you can get it, the better. But this is one of the best ferns for growing indoors because that's not as critical. You might see a little bit of browning on tips, especially on new foliage as it grows in. It might get kind of dry and crinkly. It's fine. Like, it's going to kind of impact the visual of the plant, but it's not going to damage it long term. So if those are things that you're starting to see, that usually just means a little bit more humidity would be appreciated. So do you have any questions about the other overall care for this?
I don't think so. No, I think you said, or we talked about maybe when we weren't recording, that once this gets grows to the point where I need to replace I just would then nail this or screw this into a larger board.
Yep.
I wouldn't actually demount it from it.
It's way too tricky. The plant will like become part of the wood in a way. So the best way is just going to be to put it on a new plaque.
And that we're talking years before that, right?
Yeah, I imagine that it's going to be at least 5 years
Great.
before you even need to start entertaining that notion. You might also never need to growing it indoors as a house plant. If you were in a greenhouse, it might only take a couple of years.
So as far as the wood choice goes, right? I've always heard that hardwoods are a better choice for this rather than softwoods because you are, wetting this often. They can degrade quickly. So that was a hardwood that you used, right?
No, cedar's not a hardwood. Cedar's a softwood. But cedar is also kind of rot resistant, and that's why we use it a lot in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, I didn't know that was cedar even. Okay.
Oh, yeah, it's like red cedar wood because it doesn't break down, and so you can like buy pressure treated lumber that is treated to not break down, but those have all kinds of chemicals in them that are going to be detrimental to plant growth. So you want to make sure that you're never using pressure treated wood or even plywood. I don't think that that's good because it's been like laminated with glue and everything. So use some kind of like raw-ish wood that's not stained or painted. And we used cedar even though it's not a hardwood. But there are some epiphytes that are never going to want to change their mount. So that's where you'd want to find like the hardest wood, like hickory is really hard.
Yeah, see, I've heard things like that. Hickory.
Yeah, cork doesn't rot, so even though it's softer, like it's going to take a lot longer to break down. But those are kind of things that are kind of outside of this conversation topic.
Oh yeah, but I think it's good to know that, right, going into a mount. What should you mount it on?
Yeah.
For these things, like not just pick any old wood lying around.
And the top choices that I have for something like this, cedar, because it's easy, it's inexpensive, it's soft enough that you can quickly and easily saw through it with hand tools.
As we saw.
Yeah. They were like totally shocked because I just like busted out a handsaw and like
yeah, because I thought this was
apart.
I thought this was gonna be a hard wood. I was like, oh hey, what kind of station are you gonna set up to do this? I thought it was gonna take a long time for you to cut this.
I almost brought
we
my
also
circular saw.
recommend having gloves or any type of safety.
Yeah, a lot of
tools.
recommendations. We're not gonna include those pictures. So highly redacted.
I am a white male and I can do what I want. Yeah, at my own detriment. But cedar is perfect for this. If you wanted to do it on cork, I think that you could do something really beautiful, and I think that I've seen a lot of really great cork mounted ferns. I don't tend to like that unless I want the cork to be kind of part of the style because that has such a look to it that I feel like I'd be wasting it if I was growing a fern that was going to literally cover the mound. But yeah, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of good choices that you can do. I'm sure that now that you've done this once, that might mean that you're more inclined to do it again. Do you feel like this is an approach that you'll use for other plants?
Yeah, I just don't know what plants like to grow this way.
Well, there are so many tropical foliage houseplants that grow as epiphytes in the wild. So those include like most of the orchids, a lot of the philodendrons, the Hoyas, a lot of ferns, like
Yeah,
so
I think
many
it's
plants.
it's a question of you see how this watering goes for you. Do you like this watering style, and then how much of that do you want to do?
And the nice thing is that some plants that grow epiphytically like to remain dry, so you'll water them much less frequently. Some of them that want to stay wet consistently, like the bird's nest fern or the blue fern that you have, those don't like to dry, so you're going to have to be very faithful and maybe even do that once a day when the weather's really hot. That's why I don't grow a lot of plants mounted because of that regular watering that they require. But this is a very easy technique that you can adapt to most plants. Yeah.
That's awesome.
The one thing that you don't want to do is anything that requires constantly being wet.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So for our Patreon, which we have just set up and we haven't put to any use yet, there are a couple of exotic Platycerium ferns that I want to discuss. So check out that content on our Patreon once we have that happening.
So now there's a deadline, it sounds like.
Yep,
right?
I have just given us a deadline. Sorry, Steven.
Okay, we may... Let's see how this goes, yeah.
We could edit this out.
Yeah.
So, John, did you get the information that you needed, or did we just bore you with mundane things?
No, I loved it. I learned so much. I think that the more, I feel like when I get a plant, I love reading as much as I can, and like
Yeah.
learning about it, and this just kind of increased my knowledge around it.
I think that's like a key thing about Plant Daddies.
Yeah, it's like you really spiral into the knowledge base.
Yeah. We're going to be teaching a mounting class for Phalaenopsis orchids at the plant store, Miles' shop down in White Center. And we need to kind of come up with a calendar for this because it's not set in stone yet. But this is going to be a great opportunity if any of our listeners are interested in mounting plants. We're going to be doing the Phalaenopsis, which is a really reliable flowering indoor orchid. But this is a technique that, like we just saw today, can be used for a lot of other plants. So, keep up to date with our Instagram and stuff because we're going to be announcing more about this as we get those details finalized. But we're really excited to do our first Plant Daddy podcast workshop where we're going to have members of the public learning skills from us.
Yeah, so keep an eye out for that.
Yeah. So, Steven, you already grow some mounted things. Do you think that you might add some ferns to your collection?
Listen, I like you guys. This was nice, to see.
I feel like we're being broken up with John.
Yeah. I love those ferns, like I was saying earlier, but I just think having more mounted things is a lot to ask kind of in my place. Like, they're probably the most work for me. So spraying them all the time, having a separate soaking. So I kind of feel like my mounted plant quota is sort of met right now. I don't know if I would add more, but if I had fewer mounted plants, then maybe I would.
Yeah, well.
So, I mean, hey, you're close, but like it's like get in line. It's a little bit like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
John just has one so far, so we'll see how he feels.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Okay. Any closing thoughts?
No, thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for joining.
coming.
I was really happy to have you here. It's always nice having another Plant Daddy around.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, this has been Plant Daddy Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to help others find us. If you enjoyed what you heard, we would also love a 5-star rating and maybe a couple of comments about what you've enjoyed. Tell your friends, and if you want to be in touch, email us at plantdaddypodcast@gmail.com or check out our social media, all of which can be found at Plant Daddy Podcast. We're looking forward to you tuning in next time. Thanks for listening and happy growing.
Thanks.